Okay.
Cool. So, this is a presentation all about challenging ableism presented by Community Medical Solutions. So first, I'm going to have Shannon speak, and then I'm going to have my mom speak. But first, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Emile Mclean, founder of Community Medical Solutions. And I started this to create positive change from negative experiences, from structural inequality in the form of inaccessibility to experiencing ableism verbally on a daily basis. And so I decided to start hosting free workshops to educate anybody who's interested on how to be a good disability ally, because I've only had one person stand up for me when I was experiencing ableism. So Shannon, the floor is yours. Why are you, why are you a disability ally?
My father was actually disabled before I was even born. And I grew up watching him struggle with limitations daily. And I had relatives that weren't there and weren't seeing all these constant struggles. And they would make these passing remarks. And you could see that it really would bother and hurt my father. And as a kid, I didn't feel like I could speak up. I know that I can now, and I do.
And I'm so proud of you for making that decision, because it's definitely not easy.
It's not. And as a child, you know, you're taught that you have to respect your elders and you're supposed to be seen and not heard. And it really messes with you as a child. But now I'm like, you know what? I'm bigger than most people. I can take you on now.
Yeah, besides, like, when people are disrespecting others for things that they can't help,
yes,
you can stand up. And also standing up for others' dignity, you don't have to be disrespectful about it.
You can just tell them to stop. But that's not okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't have to be an asshole. And that's why I try to teach people how to calmly educate others. And, you know, like, obviously it's easy to just get mad, but there's ways to be able to calmly explain and educate people.
Agreed.
Can somebody put on headphones, because I can hear myself?
I don't have a headset with me.
Oh, okay. That's all right then. Okay, so what makes it harder to be an ally to disabled people?
I really think that ableist thinking and verbiage, really easy to get trapped into that mindset, thinking that someone is probably just lazy, rather than just acknowledging that they could be really struggling that day. I have a friend that has rheumatoid arthritis, and she's in chronic pain constantly. And there are days when if she's worked so hard to help her kids on Monday, Tuesday is done. Tuesday's canceled. Like,
yeah. And the hard thing is that you can't see that pain.
Exactly.
And it's so easy to judge just based on what they do and not how they feel.
Exactly. And not all disabilities are visual. And even the ones that you can see, if you're not experiencing it yourself, you don't know the struggles. You don't understand the hardships. And it really just takes a moment to talk with them to try to understand. You might not be able to fully grasp it, but at least you can have a better understanding regarding the dialogue.
Exactly. And there's also so much information out there online, on YouTube, you know, vlogs, blogs, on Google about the basic experience of disability, and also understanding how to approach people to talk about it. And I'll cover this later. A lot of people walk up to me and say, "What's wrong with you? That's not the right way. That's very disrespectful." And it's just you're curious and basically trying to like entertain yourself by asking somebody about their medical history, which is traumatic for some people.
Yes.
And completely disrespecting their personal space. I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to get groceries. Why do I have to discuss this?
I'm just trying to live my life right now.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you personally challenge ableism?
Educate yourself. Learn what the ableist verbiage is and be mindful on how you think and speak.
I love that. And also, you're really good about listening to disabled people on the disabled experience instead of trying to learn from jokes and TV shows and non-realistic representations and non-authentic representations. Because for so many people, that's their only exposure. And they think that that is what disability is, and it's not. And lastly, how do you support disabled people?
By offering support to them. What can I do to support you? It can be as simple as lending an ear and just listening, and it can be confronting a medical personnel to ensure that they're getting proper treatment. It's really just being there and being on their side, being someone in someone's corner.
Yeah. Well, and asking what you need instead of assuming what they need. I feel like that's so essential. And also, supporting them and advocating for them in the medical setting. That is the really good segue into the introduction of my mom. So in 2019, after my doctors almost killed me and left me with permanent brain damage, I had to move back in with my parents because I needed multiple caretakers, and they had to drive me everywhere. After a 30-minute car ride, I was in such severe pain that I'd be vomiting and shaking and sweating, pale and weak. And my mom saw me go through a ton of medical ableism. So do you want to explain what my first PCP, Erickson, said to you about EDS, and then what you said to her? Mom? Mom? I can't hear you.
Yeah, did she mute herself?
Mom, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
You hit mute.
So before we talk about that, so when Emile came home because of being so ill, we went to our doctor, so or the practice that we always went to, and we were assured by that doctor, Dr. Erickson, that they would be an ally, that they were going to be there the whole way to figure out what was going on, to make sure that Emile could recover some of his life back or all of his life back, and that even they wouldn't just hand us off to specialists.
Which they did, absolutely.
And that even when we had to go to specialists, that what is that crunchy noise?
Oh, I'm rolling across the bricks.
Okay. All right, no worries. Anyways, but that quickly changed when it became evident that it was a complex situation.
And a rare disease.
Right. So at first, we had some big wins with the doctors immediately recognizing that meds that Emile was on were being, they weren't right for him. They were being overprescribed, and that the symptoms of ataxia and
blindness, paralysis,
blindness,
seizures.
Yeah, exactly. Were side effects of these meds. So when they changed, we started seeing some real improvements, but we still needed to do root cause analysis and figure out what was happening to begin with, you know? And once we got to a certain point, the doctor was not supportive. It became too big of a problem.
Camarillo?
What?
Keep talking.
Oh, anyways, it
Where's the
seemed
platform
like
to
became too.
Camarillo? I'm good. Where's the platform to Camarillo?
The Camarillo?
Sorry, keep talking.
Next train is at 3:06.
I have that.
You got that one?
I have that ticket. I just need to know the platform.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
I need to know what platform it leaves at.
That's Ken.
Thank you.
Ken, thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, sorry, continue.
Oh, that's good. I was just waiting till you were finished. Anyways, once it was determined that there were some other issues and it was beyond the scope of family practice, they were not interested in helping us anymore. And even though some of the specialists we went to confirmed that there was a connective disease going on.
Well, and I had a
indicated-
doctor confirm that years ago.
Yes, but they confirmed it locally. And that it could possibly be EDS, which at that point we hadn't found someone to absolutely diagnose that. Then when I was talking to the doctor about how to go forward and that we needed to find someone that could either diagnose EDS or tell us what it was if it was not EDS and how we would go forward. Instead of the doctor practicing medicine like you should and saying, okay, let's discover this, her response was EDS is a new fad that's going on, and it's not really something real. It's just some fad thing that people are talking about, and it'll be a wash. And she wasn't interested. And luckily, we had another family practice doctor in a different practice collaborating with us, who then took over Emile's medical care and was always did his best to be informed, did his best to go through Emile's history and explore with him what his options were. And basically, he demonstrated what a medical professional should be like if they are an ally to their patient. Even if that patient is having complex medical issues, that require more than coming in for a 20-minute visit, getting, antibiotics or high blood pressure medicine prescribed, and then off you go. So it was definitely a very eye-opening experience to realize and see with the myriad of doctors that we encountered. I would say probably 20% of them were open, helpful, and practicing medicine as you always think and expect a doctor to practice.
Well, yeah,
Whereas the others just wanted to shuffle you off once it became complex, or they didn't understand or didn't want to take time to understand. And, I definitely think it's something built in the system because, if you think about the majority of doctors always being male, and things you learn as a woman that you get less care because of the perspective, historically, that women are hysterical, they're emotional.
Since I'm trans, I've been told so many times that I have an emotion problem, not a pain problem.
Right. And the thing is, I think that that's not just something women,
Trans people face it too.
anybody that they don't understand, they poo-poo it off to the fact of it being emotional or hysterical.
Or anybody with
instead of
anxiety.
actually doing their jobs and investigating.
A lot
And
of people with
saying,
anxiety get that too.
what was that?
A lot of people with anxiety get that too.
Exactly. And
You kept calling he.
Camarilla?
no, I wasn't. And the, you know, it's interesting because good science means you're investigating what's going on. If you don't know what's going on, you say, I don't know. And you continue, you know, the path of pursuing knowledge and coming up with a plan. So it was very disheartening to see that the majority of our caregivers, that's not what they are. They are not people out there engaged in really caring for their patients and understanding what's going on and educating themselves and learning more and getting the proper care for everybody, regardless of their condition and whether it's
Yeah.
complex or simple.
Well, and
So-
also, did you explain what you said to her?
Well, you know, I was pretty stunned. You know, I don't remember what I said, you know, verbatim, but I do know that I reiterated that the doctor she had sent us to had confirmed that you had a connective tissue disease, that when you were in Los Angeles, a doctor had, you know, confirmed that what they felt was EDS,
Yeah.
and that we needed to find someone here that could confirm or disprove that. And she just was pretty negative, and our phone call did not end in a positive light. And quickly, like I said, quickly after that, we switched gears and you found someone that was a true ally within
Yeah.
the medical profession, you know, that
Well, and so, like I said, we also had this experience where I was in the hospital and they wanted to like test my range of motion and my legs, and you said, oh, like, be careful, his joints can dislocate, and they basically literally laughed at me. And I know that you said that you don't remember it, but if, you know, you could go back and say something, what would you have said?
well, you know, I always try to you know, make sure that if someone is not, you know, I don't know how to explain it. You know, there's times you just say, you know, your attitude is not right in this situation. You know, we're all here together to work as a team,
Exactly.
and your laughter isn't helpful, your sarcasm is not helpful, and you know, you need to pack that away and be professional. So you know, there's an appropriate time for laughter, there's appropriate time for tears, and you know, if you need to review your motivation on why you're a doctor. So
Yeah.
you know,
Okay. Yeah. So now I'm going to switch gears a little. So the history of the disability rights community and ableism is often forgotten. And so it's very important when you're discussing disability rights to remember our history. So I'm going to go over some very large points in disability history. A major thing starts in 1883, and that is the first major publication of eugenics. And eugenics is the belief that disabled people should be sterilized or killed, especially those with genetic conditions, because it weakens the human race as a whole and makes our genes dirty and vulnerable and unwanted, basically. So the practice of sterilizing and killing disabled people to purify the genes of humanity was common in the USA. It was common throughout Europe, and it was very prevalent in the Nazi era. Then in 1974, so starting in the 1930s, ugly laws started. And an ugly law basically stated that if you had any kind of a scar or disfigurement or a congenital limb difference that was visible, that it would be too traumatizing to the public and you would be fined or jailed because it was illegal to be in public because you were too ugly and would traumatize people. In 1939, the Holocaust started and disabled people were killed for being undesirable and flawed. It was legal to kill disabled people on sight, and over 70,000 people, that's the lowest estimate, with disabilities were murdered in cold blood in concentration camps alone. That's only the number of people killed in concentration camps. And that's very, very important to remember. So in 1967, oh, and also about the ugly laws, they started to end in the 1960s, but the last one ended in Kentucky in 1974. Then in 1967, so for a very, very, very long time, over 100 years, disabled people it was mandatory for them to live in institutions, and these institutions were dirty. The professionals were often ableist and abusive and had absolutely no accountability. There often was no way to even report abuse. And in 1967, there was a movement of de-institutionalization, which meant that people with disabilities were not forced into institutions anymore. And then in 1983, this was a big one for democracy. Disabled people were able to vote because, and this was not like a legal thing, basically disabled people couldn't vote until 1984 because of inaccessibility. So if you're a wheelchair user and you can't walk and nothing is accessible, you basically have no option to vote. If you're blind and you can't see anything and nobody can help you, how are you supposed to vote? You can't. So basically they had no way to vote until 1984. And it's very, very important to remember this history and to also remember that there are many, many current day injustices still going on, and I will cover those later. So now, in order to understand ableism, it's important to define disability. There are many models of disability. So there's the medical model, which is that having a health condition that limits one or more activities of daily living, which is activities that you do daily or almost that you need to live your life. Medical care is seen as the only cure or management. A cure is the only goal and solution, and the disease is the problem of the individual. Then there's the spectrum model, which says for every condition, there's a range of severity and ability, and that all humans exist on a spectrum of mood, pain, and mobility. Then there's the social model. This states that people have a disability when they have to interact with the environment differently than most, which means that you have to adapt to your environment. When I do courses for disabled people, I talk a lot about being adaptive. Our environment doesn't adapt to us, so we have to adapt to it. But if things are accessible, it negates our disability partially or fully. And a disability is anything outside the norm of mental health, mood, pain, mobility, and body type. And a disability is a socially created problem of exclusion, and integrating them into society by inclusion is the way to fix it. Disability is the responsibility of the individual and the community and the environment. And equal access and adaptation is the solution. So this is a very interesting graph. So the dotted line is defining disability as a general difference, and the solid line defines disability as a limitation or preventing you from living your life. The longer that you work in the disability industry or with disabled people, the longer you define disability as a general difference. And after 60 years, over 90% of people define disability as a general difference. And just over, maybe a little over 0% of people define disability as a limitation. So my definition of disability is probably a mixture of the social and the spectrum model. It's that any mood, sensory processing, or pain level, mobility, intelligence, or range of motion that falls out of the normal is defined as a disability, because even able-bodied people have a range of abilities, but an average person isn't seen as disabled when compared to an athlete. So somebody with a health condition should be seen as different and not less, because like I said, everybody has a range of abilities and limitations, but we have these very strict definitions. So this is a nice definition of ableism, and it's a system that places values on people's bodies and what they can do, and that their bodies and minds are a societally constructed idea of normalcy, intelligence, excellence, and productivity. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in anti-Blackness, eugenics, sexism, colonialism, and capitalism. This is a form of systematic oppression that leads people and society to determine who is valuable and worthy based on a person's appearance, ability to satisfactorily reproduce, make things, excel, and behave as expected. So ableism
Can I say
is,
something?
yeah,
So that definition, when I was reading it, I think it's important for everybody listening to this workshop to realize that this definition in itself is why everybody has to be concerned what ableism is. Because in this workshop, we're talking about ableism and its relationship and how it pertains to oppression of disabled individuals. Yet that definition in itself means that any of us, based on systemic and institutional power exchanges, could be targeted and be an oppressed group.
well, and
really.
anybody could become disabled at any time. The
That's
disabled
true.
community is the largest marginalized community that anybody can become a member of at any time. And so when you treat disabled people badly, you're perpetuating these harmful ideas. And more than likely, one day you will be disabled and you will receive the harmful ideas that you have perpetuated. And then ableism sets up people to think of people's bodies as a thing to be used. So this relates to sexism. You know, women who are infertile are seen as less. Trans women are seen as less because they have a penis, because they can't reproduce, because they don't have estrogen, because they're not feminine enough. Then it also relates to anti-Blackness, the idea that Black people should be able to take more pain because they're just naturally stronger, or that disabled people should be able to take more pain because they're just used to it. And, you know, also capitalism, that people's bodies are things to be used, and that if you can't produce enough, that your body isn't worthy or valuable.
Well, yeah, and even as you age, you know, you need a walker, you need a cane, you need assistance, more medical care. So all of us at some point are going to join that community and be definitely at a disadvantage.
Yeah. So now, a lot of people deny being ableist when they say something or act ableist. And so here I'm going to start with some very basic things. Ableism is always political, and it is always harmful, even when it is just a joke. So there are two main types of ableism. That's interpersonal and institutional. Interpersonal is ableism between people motivated by somebody's ableist beliefs. the belief that somebody is worth less than an able-bodied person because of their disability or chronic illness, and belief that a person has to do something to earn care, respect, or accessibility. With institutional ableism, it's any ableism in an institution. So now I'm going to go over experiences that I have had daily, basically. So people walk up to me and ask, what's wrong with you, before they say anything else, especially when I'm in my wheelchair because I'm 21. And I'm also trans, so I look different. People telling me that I don't deserve minimum wage because I haven't earned it. People telling me that I'm too complex for medical care, so I should be in so much pain that I black out. Doctors saying that EDS can't be real because they've never heard of it. Strangers saying that EDS can't be real because they don't understand it. Strangers staring at me when I'm in my wheelchair. Doctors ignoring my pain because I'm young, I quote, look fine, or I should be used to it by now. People telling me that if healthy people stay healthy and at-risk people get sick and die, it's just how it's supposed to be. That's basically modern eugenics. Hearing people use words like cripple and retard casually and as an insult. People saying that if they couldn't walk, that they would kill themselves. People saying that accessibility needs to be earned. And strangers saying that disabled people contribute nothing to society. So I'm going to go over a lot of common ableist beliefs and counters to these beliefs later in my workshop. This is going to be very useful. So these are the main dimensions of ableism: culture, the culture of able-bodied people, and ableism, especially capitalism, hustle culture, a lot of fitness culture even, a lot of the, just push through the pain, basically just, if you can't do something, it's because you haven't tried hard enough. All of that is ableism. Because as hard as I try, I can't walk. As hard as I try, I can't walk up a flight of stairs. And that's not because I haven't tried hard enough. It's because I have a health condition that prevents me from doing those things. So the law has a history of legalizing ableism, like the ugly laws, and discrimination or blocking access to necessary medical care and accessibility. Words, what people say to disabled people that make them feel less than. Actions, how people treat disabled people, including discrimination, violence. Disabled people are 4 to 10 times more likely to experience violence than an able-bodied person. And this also includes medical abuse because it causes physical pain, physical harm, and even death. And then the beliefs, which is the driving force behind all of these other dimensions. So the main types of ableism: interpersonals, what happens when one person discriminates against a disabled person due to ableist beliefs. This can include actions, words, lack of actions, and violence. Institutional ableism is when ableism is backed by the law or an institution. Common examples are the subminimum wage law, which means that disabled people can legally be paid subminimum wages. This has been legal for 80 years in the USA and for a lot longer around the world. Structural inaccessibility. Insurance is also a common example because you have to prove that you're sick enough for a lot of treatments. Rare diseases often get denied coverage for necessary things. And also disabled people just not being included in a lot of things because of people blaming the cost or access being too hard to implement, which it's not. Then there's internal ableism. This is often forgotten, and this is when a disabled person experiences ableism so much that they believe what they're told. Common feelings are guilt, shame, self-hate, and common thoughts are, my life would be okay if I wasn't disabled, or I hate my life because I'm disabled. So the best ways to fight ableism: for ignorance, appeal to their empathy, describe the experience of being disabled and experiencing ableism, and ask them to recall a time that they were treated differently or discriminated against. If they're Black, if they're a woman, if they're queer, ask them to remember that time and you know, empathize with us and imagine living through that on a daily basis. And then for a lot of like the more hardcore discrimination, hate of disabled people, challenging ableist beliefs through calm, logical points, and real examples of disabled people doing things that they wouldn't expect. Those are very, very good for this instance. Calmly explain your points and views. Do not get angry or belligerent. Obviously, I completely understand people being hurt and upset and angry at ableism, but it does not help when you're trying to make people change their minds. You have to be stronger than them. You have to rise above that. And I know that it's hard, but it's necessary, and you have to be an advocate out of love for your community, not hate for the enemy. And then education. A lot of people aren't allies or don't stand up for disabled people because they have no idea about what's going on. They have no idea about the sub-minimum wage laws. They have no idea about the past that in America, 70,000 disabled people were forcibly sterilized without their consent. They have no idea about any of that. Explain the many injustices we've faced in the past and still face now. Explain the laws that protect and perpetuate ableism that are still in place. Many people have no idea about these, and for that reason are not as much of an ally as they could be. So this is how I challenge ableism. And I'm focusing on appealing to empathy and educating people. So again, describing the disabled experience in detail and asking somebody to imagine living that way and being barred access to buildings because of a genetic condition you never asked to be born with. Describing the experience and frequency of my ableist interactions and asking people to empathize with the time that they were treated differently for something that they couldn't help. Describe that I can't help being born this way and that it's unfair to be treated differently for something that I didn't choose and that I can't help. And then education. This was key. So many people have no idea about the past and current injustices disabled people face, which is no excuse because this information is readily available. But it's, obviously that doesn't undo the harm. So calmly educating them and on what you need and what's going on is so important. Fighting bigotry with facts about the financial benefits of including disabled people, which I cover later, and the very minute cost of accessibility is also essential. So many people blame inaccessibility on, well, it's too expensive. No, it's not. Well, there's nothing to gain. Yes, there is. Just showing them facts, because a lot of people don't have empathy for disabled people if they're far enough into their bigotry. So that's why the facts, got to stick with the facts and stay calm. So types of ableism that I've experienced, words, and these are probably just the most common. You do so much. You can't be disabled. You don't work. So do you really need access to every building, let alone deserve it? You can walk. You don't need a wheelchair or a walker. And then actions. I've had people grab me and try to help me into my wheelchair without telling or asking me. This is just assuming what I can and can't do. This is taking away my bodily autonomy and also invading my personal space because I'm disabled. And also, they're probably not doing that because they care. They're doing it because they pity me. People staring, people laughing at me when I fall, people tripping me when I have a cane. All these are real examples and experiences. Lack of actions, being ignored multiple times when I fall out of my wheelchair, and having people watch me as I crawl, sometimes through mud, to my wheelchair. Examples of ableism. Ableism can present in your words, your actions, and your lack of actions. Ableist lack of actions, not standing up for somebody when they are being discriminated against. I've only had one person stand up for me when I have experienced ableism, out of this happening daily. And then staring at somebody in a wheelchair, not helping somebody because they look fine or they're young, and watching them struggle, which happens to me a lot. For doctors, withholding treatment because somebody is too young for pain, they don't look disabled, they're too complex, they should be used to it, or you haven't heard of their condition, so it must be fake. Ableist words, using slurs such as retard and cripple. Know the history of these words, they're very dark. And also, with or without the history, people use them as insults on the daily. That automatically makes them slurs. Understand how these words have been used against disabled people and able-bodied people. When an able-bodied person messes up, they're called a retard, they're called autistic. And so even able-bodied people receive this kind of treatment, and obviously it hurts worse if you do have a developmental disability, but just like able-bodied people still receive ableism in certain forms. Ableist actions, treating somebody in a cold or hostile way because their disability is visible. Moving somebody's wheelchair without asking, trying to trip somebody when they're using a cane. And I love this quote, the cruelest symptom of our illness is disbelief by medical personnel. So this is my favorite part of this presentation. Counters to ableist beliefs. Ableist beliefs lead to ableist words and actions, and then to discrimination and violence. It also leads to ableism being perpetuated in the culture, protected by law, and pervasive in our institutions. Disability has a certain look. Even if you look fine, you can be disabled. And like I said, there is no look for disability. If you can walk, you don't need a wheelchair. And wheelchair users exist for many, many reasons, such as weakness, energy, joint instability, balance, fainting, and pain. We can walk because we have a wheelchair. We can function more because we have a wheelchair. If you don't understand your disability, you must be faking. There's so many rare or unheard of or crazy conditions. This does not mean that they are fake. It means they are closed-minded. Disability is only for the old. There's no age limit to acquired or congenital disability. Disabled people don't contribute anything to society. This is so wrong. Disabled people are workers and parents, which contribute to society. And even if they don't work, they contribute to society in many other ways, like contributing to the culture. Disabled people weaken the gene pool. This is not right and leads to eugenics and violence. Life as a disabled person is not worth living. This is not true. Disability makes life harder, but it's always worth living when society and the medical system fails to provide for us. People with developmental disabilities don't understand anything. I once heard somebody say that nonverbal people, and my best friend is nonverbal sometimes, are inanimate objects like a wig because they don't speak. And nobody challenged her. Nobody in the whole room challenged her. So even if somebody is nonverbal, a lot of times, unless they have a very, very, very severe cognitive disability. Yay, somebody else joined. Hi, Barbara. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you joining. So you did miss a little, but I will send the recording so that you can see the first part. So right now we're just covering common ableist beliefs and counters to these beliefs. Also, I hope you're doing well. So people with physical impairments also must be developmentally disabled. What? Okay. Hi, Barbara. I hope that you're doing okay. Thank you for joining. So you did miss the first part in my guest speaker introduction, but I'll send you the link to this so that you can see the first part, and it'll also be posted on my event page and my Fighting Ableism page. So people with physical impairments also must be developmentally disabled. While with some physical conditions, developmental disabilities are common, this is not usually the case. And it's also not right to assume that just because somebody's in a wheelchair that they must be developmentally disabled. or that because somebody's in a wheelchair, they quote, look retarded, to use the same words that I've heard people say many, many times. So then disabled people have to earn accessibility. This isn't right. Everybody should have the right to get into every building, regardless of if they work or not. Kids have the right to go into every building, and they don't have a job. Old people have the same right. And also, freedom of movement is a right in America, unless you're disabled because of inaccessibility. And then being on SSDI is a perpetual vacation. Every single disabled person would much rather work than stay home in pain. It's a full-time job being disabled. And if we're too sick to work, we're also too sick to travel all the time. And so it's not a vacation. So now I'm going to cover ableist words and the importance of inclusive language. So microaggressions are indirect, subtle, maybe sometimes unintentional discrimination against individuals based on their disability. These take the form of statements, actions, incidents, or exclusions like, wow, I couldn't do that. Can I pray for you? Or you don't look or act disabled. Or have you tried this? Congratulating somebody on something not worth the congratulations, like getting dressed or leaving their house, which is just assuming that they have no life because they're disabled. So verbal ableism, why does ableist language matter? Violent movements always start with violent and degrading and dehumanizing rhetoric. A society that does not tolerate ableist language will not tolerate violence towards disabled people. A society that is verbally abusive towards disabled people will tolerate physical violence and discrimination. The importance of inclusive language cannot be overstated. Many disability-related slurs have a terrible history that many people are unaware of, but that doesn't excuse that they use cripple and autistic as insults, automatically making them slurs. What can you do about this? Learn the history of these words. Replace crazy, lame, and cripple with other alternatives. Educate and call out others when you hear them using these words. Challenging somebody's ableist words challenge their beliefs that nobody cares about disabled people. Challenging somebody's ableist words makes disabled people feel uplifted and included instead of attacked, not believed, and invalidated. Ableist language, since that it is not challenged, sends a signal that being disabled is bad and automatically negative. When ableist language is not challenged, that the person who speaks that way feels that they are in the right and that everybody agrees with that. So this is a nice graphic that says many supermarkets have a one person per household entrance rule. This means people with invisible disabilities or severe mental health needs are having to explain publicly to strangers why they need a helper. But can you find anywhere online that states this rule in writing? So now this is about a specific verbal issue that I come across all the time because I'm 21 and have an invisible disability. Avoiding the word disabled implies disability is only and always a negative thing to be. It erases and ignores the amount of medical care we need just to get to this level of functioning and the amount of symptoms we have with what we do, regardless of how productive we are. Being productive does not cancel out your disability, and using words like handy-capable instead of disabled also implies that calling yourself disabled is bad, and it's not. Because disability is a difference, not something bad. It's also how people say, you do so much, you aren't disabled, you're handy-capable. Being capable doesn't erase your disability. But if somebody feels more empowered using a word other than disabled, don't argue with them, just like how, if you feel empowered using the word disabled, people shouldn't argue with you. Many people argue with me labeling myself as disabled. Here are the common excuses. I do so much, I'm too young, I look fine. If I call myself disabled, I'll give up. Disability is always negative, so why would I call myself disabled? Here are my counters to these arguments. Doing a lot doesn't negate my disability. Disability has no age requirement. Disability has no look. I'm already disabled and haven't given up, so there's no point in denying it. Disability is a difference, not a curse. It's empowering to be recognized as disabled in this environment. So now, most able-bodied people have no idea that this exists, but people fetishize disability. It's called a devotee. Somebody who fetishizes disability, medical devices, and disabled people. Well, there's nothing wrong with celebrating disability and sexuality. There are many issues with devotees. Disabled people are objects of pleasure for able-bodied people. They disregard the trauma of disability and ableism. They ignore how to be a healthy ally, and how to celebrate disability and sexuality in a healthy way. They make light of mobility aids, medical devices, and the use of caretakers. They make light of slurs like cripple and retard. They ignore the inherent ableism of being a devotee. They perpetuate sexism and perpetuate stereotypes of disability. What can you do to combat devotees? Normalize disability and sex. Support disabled people of all sexualities. Educate yourself on disability and sex and how to make sex more accessible. Do not stigmatize disabled people exploring their sexuality, body, wearing skimpy clothing, or talking about sex. Be open to dating disabled people, but do not fetishize disability or their medical devices. Now, this section is on institutional ableism. This includes the physical barriers, policies, laws, and regulations, and practices that exclude people with disabilities from full participation and equal opportunity. Limited insurance coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. No ramps in building. Broken elevators with no other option but stairs. Triage policies that allow doctors to deny care based on medical history and disability. No interpreters available. Lack of accommodations in school and the workplace. Institutional ableism. Here are just a few examples. Ssdi deducts money that you make in a legal job from your payment of $1,100 a month, which is under the poverty line. And SSDI payments can be lost if you get married. The USA has never had more than 1% of accessible homes. In the UK, if you have EDS, which is my condition, doctors are legally obligated to report you as having Munchausen's disorder and don't recognize you as having a connective tissue disorder, so you can never have treatment. Price gouging. This common practice of raising the price unnecessarily of life-saving medications is despicable and terrifying, and people must choose death or bankruptcy. Churches and private institutions do not have to be accessible. Disabled people can legally be paid sub-minimum wages in the USA and across the world. In England, Scotland, Wales, and Norway, people can abort a fetus that is known to have a physical or developmental disability, most famously Down syndrome in Norway. Over
That can happen in the US
99%
too.
of
So
yeah, but in Norway, over 99% of people with pregnant people with Down who have a child with Down syndrome abort it. And they have considered that as a cure, but death is not a cure. So, and then disabled people are 4 to 10 times more likely to experience physical violence. But in 2017, disability-related hate crimes were not included in the FBI hate crime statistics, and it took an NGO campaigning to get them put up for the 2019 statistics. Insurance. Even with insurance, treatments are expensive, and if you are uninsured, you can't afford any treatment. Some treatments aren't covered by insurance, especially if you're a rare condition, and some conditions disqualify you from treatment. Now, what can you do about institutional ableism? In the workplace, talk to your boss about inaccessibility. Stand up for disabled coworkers. Problem solve when you hear people saying making things inclusive and accessible is too hard. If you are an employer, pay disabled workers minimum wage. and ensured equal access and inclusion. In the law, look up ableist laws, contact your local state representative about changing them, and support non-government organizations and activists that are campaigning against them. Ssdi and Poverty, financially support your disabled friends, as over 1 in 5 disabled people, which is 20%, are under the poverty line. Donate your time and money to a charity that alleviates poverty in the disabled community. Structural and accessibility. Support initiatives and charities that aim to make the world more accessible. Give your money or time to accessible businesses. Start petitions or boycotts against inaccessible chain companies and public spaces, or support existing petitions and movements that do that. My encounters with institutional ableism. My school doesn't have to be accessible because it's private. When doctors mess up, they have no negative repercussions. The law protecting legal discrimination, minimum wages, price gouging with medicines. My doctor neurologically poisoned me with legal medication because he didn't believe my condition was real, because I had anxiety. And then when I tried to sue for medical neglect, I was told I didn't have enough evidence. Insurance not covering necessary tests and diagnosis, tests for diagnosis or meds or braces because my diagnosis is rare. Houses are much more expensive, over 3 times more expensive if they are accessible. Fighting for accessibility in a mental health program and having people say that I'm asking for special treatment and should do things my body can't because everybody else has to. Despite the CDC having clear medical mask exemption guidelines, some stores kick me out saying that it's store policy that everybody wears a mask, despite me explaining and showing them the CDC guidelines and telling them that I will faint if I wear a mask. Inaccessibility is not okay. It's always rooted in ableism. When people say it's too expensive to make things accessible, they have the money and mean disabled people aren't worth the time and effort. When you hear this, ask what the real cost of accessibility is. Ask what their budget for other non-essential things are. The USA has so many resources which are unequally distributed. People should not be forcibly excluded because they physically can't get in the building. A little bit of problem solving could fix many access issues, but people just don't want to try. People go to great lengths to make things perfect for public figures or celebrities and people that they respect, but disabled people aren't worth the same effort. You never know what somebody can offer, but doesn't because of inaccessibility. Give everybody the same chance you would any able-bodied person. Just let them in the door. Disabled people don't have to earn accessibility. Equal access ensures equal opportunity. Access looks different for physical disabilities, developmental sensory disabilities, and mental illnesses. And here are some very helpful statistics on accessibility. 52% of schools are not wheelchair accessible. 61% of government websites are not accessible. 79% of disabled people face difficulties or cannot evacuate during a disaster. Accessibility saves lives. Countries with accessibility standards and guidelines. Americas, 64%. Europe, 95%. Africa, 48%. Asia, 73%. Oceania, 71%. Accessible transportation. 94% of the UK buses were accessible as of 2016. 25% of London tube stations are accessible. That means 75% of metro stations in London are not accessible. Disabled people are twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people. And disabled people will need to apply to 60% more jobs than non-disabled people before they find a job. 9 in 10 disabled people who are not in work are economically inactive. Accessible leisure. 72% of disabled adults have experienced at least one barrier when playing sports. 3/4 of disabled people have left a shop or business because of accessibility issues. Common accessibility barriers: 44% narrow stairs, doors, and corridors, 23% inadequate lifts or escalators, 22% lack of ramps and handrails, 21% parking problems. And then 68% of disabled adults have experienced at least one barrier when visiting museums. This is the percentage of increase in ADA lawsuits for inaccessibility. There was 181% between 2017 and 2018. And there's a 20% potential percentage of population exclusion when your website is not accessible. And this is the value that inclusive design can bring. 228,000 additional tertiary qualifications could be earned as a result of inclusive design in higher education. $4.5 billion in annual economic benefit through additional salary earnings. Financial services, $832,000 or 1,000 additional Australians that become financially included. $1.5 billion additional revenue for the financial services industry from annual fees. Economic benefits, $1.6 billion in reduced government spending on welfare, health, and criminal justice systems. $11.9 billion in increased gross domestic product. In retail, $4 billion increase in revenue. So this is all about making democracy accessible. There have only been 3 disability rights marches ever. And also, a lot of marches are not accessible. You don't see disabled people at a lot of marches. Many pride marches aren't accessible. A lot of intersectional spaces aren't accessible. So mail-in voting is key to housebound people. Online voting should be an option. And accessibility should always be ensured for in-person voting. For marches, have a shorter march, have places to sit, stream online for people who are housebound and bedbound. Choose a good road with sidewalks and curb dips. Have rest breaks. For people who can't come, make signs for able-bodied allies to carry. People who can't come, physically call in to speak. Have plenty of seating areas and space. For COVID high-risk people, masks are required unless medically exempt. Take temperatures and socially distance. And then also have a COVID tracking system. Wheelchair users and sensory processing disorder. Have temp ramps in if anything's not accessible. For autism and sensory processing disorder, have a quiet area that they can go to with sensory stems that are safe. Have notes that they can read during and after. No loud sounds. Have earplugs available for free. Have audio captions available. Anxiety and PTSD. Anxiety and PTSD can be a major barrier to people who want to be politically active, but they're just not included. So have licensed counselors standing by. Have free fidget toys. Have an anxiety-free room with weighted blankets, calm music, and low lights. PTSD, minimize common triggers and have trigger warnings. Respect working service dogs. Have a PSA on trigger minimizing to all guests. For the blind and deaf people, have space for people with white canes to walk. Have people giving guided directions to people who don't have white canes or do and want directions. For hard of hearing people, have a sign language interpreter. Have subtitles of all audio. For idiopathic anaphylaxis, allergies, and MCAS, which is a rare disorder that makes you have anaphylaxis related to a lot of different environmental things. Keep away from strong smells like perfumes, scented deodorants, soaps, and detergents. No common allergens like peanuts, and no smoke ableism, a practice where disabled people internalize the discriminatory ideas and prejudices from our ableist culture and society. This may result in feelings of inferiority, being lesser, and feeling like you aren't entitled to certain things due to your disability. Thinking you should lower your relationship standards because who would want to be with somebody disabled, which I've done. Not asking for accommodations you are entitled to, as to not bother someone or feel like a burden. Ableism is connected to all of our struggles because it undergirds notions of whose bodies are considered valuable, desirable, and disposable. Internalized ableism. Understand that others invalidating your disability doesn't take away your diagnosis. Realize it's easy to be gaslit by people in power like doctors. So when they say ableist things, it can leave deep wound. Invisible illness is not an imaginary illness. A rare disability is not a made-up disability. Be mindful of how you feel when using medication and mobility aids. If you feel guilt and shame, you have internalized the is either. Society is ableist, and we learn from society. It makes sense we would pick up ableist. Multiple different platforms and other resources similar to that. And my website also has mantras for anybody with a disability so that you can validate yourself with quick and easy mantras. Everybody, even healthy people, have limitations that we cannot get past without hurting ourselves. It's natural. Some people have more limitations than others, but that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. This type of thing.
um, you traveling kind of, you got in a zone with spotty reception. We'll hang on for a little bit before we end our participation. Oh.
Tunnel. Hello?
Hey.
Sorry, I went through a tunnel.
Oh, okay. We have.
Okay. Can you still see and hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, people with EDS tend to minimize their pain to try to seem as normal as possible. We don't want to be perceived as complainers, so we keep our pain to ourselves as much as we can. Recognize the ability and disability. Disabled people can do so much without even leaving their wheelchairs. These are beautiful pictures that I like to look at all the time. because a wheelchair doesn't have to be a prison. So now I'm going to cover, again, what you can do to challenge ableism. First of all, have an anti-ableist attitude. And second of all, be an ally to disabled people. So the anatomy of an ally. Speak out against injustice. Sniff out implicit bias. Identify privilege. Listen to the experience of disabled people. Cultivate empathy for the oppressed. Take action and make a change. What can you do about ableism? Make sure there's always a seat at the table. Educate yourself about disability. Interact with disabled people. Check your language use and speak out against ableism. Actively challenging ableism whenever and wherever you see it. So instead of, if you are a parent of somebody with a disability, I have seen a lot of people who are the child of a parent who had this, who basically were more worried about how the kid's disability impacted them than how it impacted the child. So this says, instead of listing all the reasons why your children's disabilities, the disabilities, difficulties your children have worry you so much, make you feel like you need to tell everyone, how about you start listing all the problems with an ableist society that is making your children's lives so hard, not welcoming them, putting them in real danger now as they become adults. What is an ally? And also, thank you, Sharon, for making this wonderful graphic. An ally is a privileged member of a group who uses their privilege to help benefit a member of a marginalized group, help benefit the marginalized group as a whole. In this case, this means an able-bodied person using their privileges to help raise awareness for the issues surrounding disability and ableism, and use their group membership as leverage for the disabled group to get access to new opportunities as they would otherwise not have been able to reach. What does an ally do? Educate yourself by listening to and engaging with disabled people with respect, not entitlement. It includes raising awareness for disability rights, causes, and contributing to the disabled community by being present in protests, challenging ableism when you see and hear it. Being an ally is an underrepresented form of love and respect. It is a commitment and a practice. Why be an ally? This is very important. Some disabled people are fully or partially nonverbal. Some have a severe intellectual disability and can't verbalize thoughts and feelings like others can. Some disabled people can't speak in venues like able-bodied people can due to lack of accessibility. Some chronically ill people have severe symptoms that limit their functionality and energy, causing them to have brain fog and need extra rest. Being an ally allows you to communicate the feelings and needs of the community using your platform of privilege on the issues that matter the most. To be an ally, you must be anti-ableist. Anti-ableist ableism is strategies, theories, actions, and practices that challenge and counter ableism, inequalities, and prejudices, and discrimination based on apparent and non-apparent disability. Allyship. Be mindful of how you approach somebody. There's a world of difference between somebody coming up to me, saying what's wrong with you before saying hello, somebody starting a conversation and then asking if they can learn more about my condition. Be aware some people have PTSD from how they acquire their disability, and respect if they do not want to talk about it. Imagine if somebody asked you about your medical history while you were rolling down the street or shopping, or just trying to live your life. How would you feel? Constantly grow and learn and try to improve yourself. You may be a better ally to full-time wheelchair users than to part-time wheelchair users. You may not include trans or Black disabled people in your advocacy, or you may not consider how having a rare condition changes how ableism is presented to the disabled person. Watch your language. Do not use mental illnesses as adjectives. Do not use disabilities or conditions as an insult, like you're so autistic or retarded. And also call out ableist language of others. And don't joke about disability. It's okay to laugh with a disabled person if they make a joke, but don't laugh at them. So roadblocks to allyship. Disconnect with community, not knowing how to get involved in the disability community and finding people to discuss disability rights with. Finding people to create a community of progress and democracy around is key to being an ally. Disability seems unapproachable. If you want to learn what the disabled experience is like, talk to an actual disabled person. But also respect their space and know what you can easily look up, like generic information on conditions, but much more personal things on blogs and vlogs and social media, and what you should talk to somebody about, like the more intimate details of their disability experience. You can also learn a lot about laws and history by books and Google. Don't use disabled people like Google. It's very frustrating and draining unless you want an in-depth conversation. Society. Recognize that our society and medical system is ableist, and we all have to participate in the system to survive and thrive. Because of this, we have to work to dismantle the system while inside of it, because it also ruins and ends lives, like price gouging, that forces people to ration life-saving medications like insulin until they die. Remember, allyship is a commitment and a practice that takes time to become second nature. Mistakes are natural. Don't get too down. Being willing to make it a learning experience and help is good enough. There are lots of resources and information online. Being an ally is not conditional. You can't be an ally person or a section of people and not everybody. If you exclude people from your allyship, you are not an ally. You're either an ally to everybody or nobody. If you're only an ally to the people you like, you're not an ally, because basic respect is not conditional. For example, my ex that I dated said that they were an ally, but then when they were mad or when we broke up, said a ton of ableist things like that I'm a piece of shit because I don't work. Well, I didn't work because nobody would treat me. And that's not being an ally. That's being ableist and not disclosing it. If somebody calls you out on your ableism, don't deny it or make excuses. Listen to what they say and then take that into account. Try to grow and make it a learning experience, saying, but one time I helped a disabled person, or I can't be ableist, my grandma's disabled, doesn't help the situation at all. Question and challenge stereotypes of all kinds of disability, rare conditions, progressive diseases, invisible illness, chronic illness, young disabled people, and all types of wheelchair users, and discuss it in the open with others. Call out the ableism of others, even when your disabled friends and relatives are not around. The only way to dismantle ableism is to challenge it constantly and show that we will not stand for disabled people to be disrespected just because they are not there. Consider the idea that disability is not automatically a bad or negative thing. While it can be painful, it's only a tragedy when society fails to protect its most vulnerable groups, like during COVID. Keep up to date on disability rights news and read about disability rights history. Don't tell a disabled person to be quiet, not to speak about their doctor's disability, pain or symptoms, or experiences with ableism. It's part of our day-to-day lives, and we already have to be quiet and need a space to be open about our reality. It would be like me getting mad at you for talking about going to the grocery store, something that you also need to stay alive. This is an essential part of our life, and you may not understand it or need it, but we do. If a disabled person's disability makes you uncomfortable, it's not their fault, it's your issue. Help a disabled person out of goodwill, not pity. What can you do against disability? Be an ally, call out ableist language, ensure accessibility when possible, volunteer disability rights, not charities and NGOs. Educate yourself and others on ableism, its impacts, and the struggle for rights and accessibility. Emotionally support and validate your disabled friends. Normalize, but not fetishize, disabled people having sex. Sign and share petitions and donate your energy to disability rights campaigns. What can you do to be anti-ableist? Have you experienced or witnessed ableism? What actions will you take to be more anti-ableist? Presume competence. Point out barriers. Journal your thoughts. Be empathetic, sincere, and open. Share articles and first-person perspectives about disability and ableism. Join our online communities for more discussions and resources. Acknowledge people with disabilities. Also, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So this, and I'm coming to the end and then I'll have a Q&A. So this is the cycle of allyship. Acknowledge your mistakes and that ableism is not on purpose always. It is ingrained and takes works to unlearn. Listen and learn from disabled people who have experienced ableism and the disabled experience. Apply what you learned in everyday life to make the lives of disabled people better. Get feedback and advice from the disabled people in your life, and then change your words and actions to best support them. The growth of an ally. Support. You have a disabled loved one. You become aware of some issues disabled people face. You learn about disability rights from disabled people. Change whatever mistakes you made. Become more active in the disability rights community. Advocate for others there. And that's the pinnacle of being an ally, is advocating for others, even when they're not there, and even when you have nothing to benefit from it. And this is my contact information. My Twitter is @disability.wage.equality. My Instagram is ellersdownloads.events. My Facebook page is Fighting Ableism. My Reddit is ellersdownloads_events. And then I can send you guys like the link to my website. So it is Q&A time. Does anybody have questions about challenging ableism?
Well, I did a
Hello? Dad? Dad, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were at Jakewood Park and you hit a rough spot and fell out of your chair. And there was a lady that just stood there and was staring like it was entertainment or something.
Yeah.
The difference
like I was a
that
spectacle.
and when we were at the beach and you hit the curb and came out of your chair, and the guy actually stopped his truck, got out, and is there anything I can do to help? So it's amazing the difference in responses that people have, where
Yeah,
one is like, oh, this is kind of a sideshow, and the other is people that actually have genuine concern
For their fellow
well,
man.
for their fellow
I'd say
person.
that
So
yeah,
I also
I mean,
Hold
it's
on,
kind
Emile.
of okay.
okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Me?
Yes, Emile.
Well, so I'd say that it's the difference between helping somebody out of pity and helping somebody out of goodwill. For example, today I had somebody try to grab me and pull me into my wheelchair when I was already in my wheelchair, and it was so awkward because they didn't ask, they didn't tell me, and he was just assuming what I couldn't do. And that's definitely out of pity, out of not understanding my limitations and not respecting my autonomy as a disabled person. Because as a disabled person, you do have to give up a lot of your personal space and bodily autonomy versus people wanting to help you out of, just wanting to help you as a person. Like, I'm sure that if somebody else fell down in a different context, that guy still would have been concerned about them, or that if somebody else needed help in a different context, like if they were getting robbed or something else happened, that guy still would have been concerned.
He was genuinely concerned.
Yeah, well, some people are, and I'd say that it's also like the difference of people stopping and saying what's wrong with you before anything else, and people having a conversation and then saying, can you educate me on your condition? Can I learn more? You know, it's genuine. I want to learn versus I'm just curious, entertain me.
Exactly.
But
And then the other,
the thing is, though, I think it's good not to ever make assumptions because, like, you know, people, all of us can be socially awkward, especially if it's something we don't encounter every day, that we don't have this natural feel and flow for how to interact with our environment. So I think it's important to, when we encounter that, to question in a polite way, like you were saying, don't get mad before. I think it's good to engage and see what they're thinking.
Well, yeah, like also just asking somebody, if you're not sure about somebody's intent, you can ask, why did you ask that? Why did you do that? And if they feel comfortable, it probably wasn't that good of an intention.
Right. I mean, you will get your answer if you are neutral and say, well, why are you asking this? And they're like, I'm just curious. I've never seen anybody like you. You know, like you're a sideshow, or
yeah, because
I just
you have to remember the history of the freak show, which still goes on.
Well, I mean, it's one of the base aspects of human existence is people taking pleasure in other people's, you know, in something that they don't see every day.
I'm talking about like the literal actual freak show.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, I think it's go ahead.
Oh, Barbara, do you have any questions?
Oh, no, I'm just really enjoying listening. This has been a lot of great information, and
I'm so glad
just
you
enjoying
enjoyed it.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I missed the beginning part. I missed the time change earlier.
It's totally fine. I'll send you the recording so that you can catch up, okay?
Great.
Thank you so much for
Thank
tuning
you.
in. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for doing this. There's so much good information that so many people need to know.
And do you
Because I
want me
run
to
into all the
send?
same things, you know?
Yeah,
Nobody
and I can,
knows what EDS is, and they just
Yeah.
don't get it. And they
and I
don't
can
know why
also,
I can hike a trail one day and then can't move for 5 days, you know?
yeah,
Well,
or like
you just did this, so
people,
what's wrong with doing it again?
yeah, and I love when people are like, oh my God, like you stood up, but you're in a wheelchair. And I was like, yeah, I can stand up
Yeah.
because I was in my wheelchair earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so, and I'll also send you my list of chronic illness affirmations
Great.
that I made all myself, along with the recording of my video.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, this
Yeah.
is great. You're doing a wonderful job. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, and I also have a disability self-advocacy course where you take a self-assessment and get custom health goals, and then I work one-on-one with you, and I have role playing, I have reading and writing activities to really help you figure out how to advocate for yourself, specifically in the medical setting, based on a lot of my experience and a lot of like books that I've read and stuff. I'll send you the link to that, and I also have Empowered in Pain for EDS specifically, as well as just a general EDS education workshop. Do you want me to send you links to those as well?
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so
I
much
never
for
heard of
tuning in.
EDS before I was diagnosed a year and a
Same.
half ago. So.
And like
I'm 42, so.
Oh, wow. I've had chronic pain my whole life. My first dislocation, I was very young, and I never spoke up about my pain because there was no awareness for chronic illness. And I thought that it was normal to be in pain. So that's why I do education like this, to tell people, if you're in pain, go to the doctor. It's not normal, because there's no awareness, there's no education. And having an early diagnosis is so essential, you know?
Yeah, I'm really glad that I got mine, and now my son's been diagnosed too. He's 15 and
That's awesome. I'm
just
so
got his
glad that you both
brain
have that
surgery, but
figured
he's on
out.
top of it now, you know.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
And we
having my
have a little more of
diagnosis
an
helps
idea.
so much.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it also helps you feel a lot less like, you know, you're just like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do what everybody else can? And so just
Yeah.
knowing that there's something else different literally in your DNA, that helps so, so much.
It does. It
And
really
also,
does.
if you have anything like autism or SPD and you want a copy of the notes, I'm totally happy to email you a plain text version or a copy of the PowerPoint. All of my workshops are going to be SPD friendly, no bright lights, no loud sounds, and I'll always have a copy of notes for people before and after so that they can read it, follow along.
Oh, that's wonderful. My sister actually has autism as well as EDS.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I just try to make things as accessible as possible because
wonderful.
I can't honestly call myself an advocate if I exclude people through inaccessibility. I just can't. I can't do it, you know?
Right. Well, I think you're doing a great job. This has been
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
I'm so happy to help.
Catch in.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna go now, but if you have any more questions, feel free to message me, okay?
Okay, I will.
Have
Thank
a wonderful
you so
day.
Much. You
course.
too. Safe travels.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Also, I love is that a cat or a dog?
Oh, it's a dog.
Oh, that's so cute.
This is Taco.
He's just tucked in. Oh my God, I love it.
He's a
That's
new
adorable.
rescue. Yeah.
Oh,
So yeah.
I love him. Yeah. My parents have a rescue cat, and he'll lay on you, but it makes me really jealous. But yeah, no, like if you have any questions at all, if you want a copy of the notes, don't hesitate to DM me, okay?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Bye. And thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot.
No.